chasing coral, Richard Beaver says, "Most people look up into space with wonder. Yet we have this almost alien world on our own planet, just teeming with life. However, it's a world most people never explore."
Hello, I'm Ellyn.
I'm Matthew.
And I'm Katie. We are discussing the depletion of the coral reefs because the ocean is 70% of the Earth's surface and supplies 2/3 of the world's oxygen.
The marine life in the ocean depends greatly on the coral reefs to survive, and people depend on that marine life for food.
This issue is a huge global crisis, and if we don't act quickly in the coming decades, we could lose our coral reefs for good.
Coral reefs are large underwater structures made from the skeletons of hundreds of thousands of corals. Each individual coral is referred to as a polyp. New coral polyps live on the calcium carbonate exoskeletons of their ancestors, adding their own exoskeleton to the existing coral. Over the centuries, the coral reef slowly grows, one tiny exoskeleton at a time, until they become massive features of submarine environments.
Now that we know what coral reefs are, let's look at what they provide for the Earth and why it is so important that we keep them safe.
Coral reefs are important to the Earth for a multitude of reasons. 25% of marine life is dependent on them. Some animals, such as the clownfish, use the reefs as their home for protection, while the parrotfish use them directly for food. These animals rely on corals to stay alive. Coral reef ecosystems are beneficial to the human economy. They protect against erosion, cultivate fisheries, and create and sustain tourism activities. The National Ocean Service describes coral reefs as the medicine cabinets of the 21st century. They sometimes aid in treating Alzheimer's, cancer, arthritis, heart disease, and various other diseases.
Coral is vital to the environment and the economy, which is why it is so important to understand the causes and symptoms of coral death, namely climate change and pollution.
Coral bleaching is an indicator that a coral is under stress. This can be caused by a couple of different things: too low or high water temperature, or too much sunlight, for example. The result of coral bleaching is that the algae, which lives inside the coral and gives the coral 90% of its energy and nutrients, is expelled from the animal, leaving the coral white and bleached. In 1997 and 1998, there was a first massive global bleaching event due to higher temperatures in the oceans due to El Niño conditions. According to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, this killed 15% of the world's corals. In 2000, there was a second global event, and in 2016, there was a third, which, according to the documentary Chasing Corals, killed 29% of the Great Barrier Reef. That documentary on Netflix was made in an effort to document this global bleaching. It usually leads to the coral starving to death, but it is possible for the corals to get their color back. Some corals have adapted to have a more fluorescent color, and researchers believe that this could be a result that could act as a sunscreen for the corals to protect them from bleaching. By averaging current projections of ocean temperatures, over the next 25 years, bleaching could damage much of the world's coral beyond repair. In order to learn more about what is being done to restore coral reefs, we interviewed cutting-edge researcher and marine biologist Dr. Dave Vaughn.
I'm Dr. Dave Vaughn, and I'm the program manager for the Coral Reef Restoration Project. And I work at Mote Marine Laboratory in the Florida Keys.
Dr. Vaughn has decades of experience researching and restoring coral reefs, focusing on staghorn coral. He has even given a TEDx talk about his research. He discovered an innovative technique to increase coral growth rate early in his career, which he has successfully put into practice.
I was a half a year to a year into looking at these little coral babies, and they were still the size of a head of a pin to maybe a pencil eraser. 1 year old. And now I realize why only 1 in a million makes it out of the wild with them being that small for that long. And 2 years old, they were only the size of a dime. 3 years old, the size of a quarter to a $50. And it was 3.5 years before it actually started putting up the horns that looked like the elkhorn coral or like moose ant. And I got so disappointed that it was taking so long that I put them all on the lower shelf of the glass aquarium and forgot about them. And they went to move one of them, and I didn't realize it had stuck to the bottom. And when I moved it, it cracked and broke some of the polyps off, which I thought was going to hurt it. But instead, those small polyps grew 10 to 20 to 40 times faster and grew back up to the size that had taken 3 did it in just a few weeks to a few months.
Dr. Vaughn calls this his eureka moment, even though it was an accident. He has been using this technique ever since and hopes to implement it around the world, training others as he goes in order to leave a great legacy.
So now it was born what we now call microfragmentation. And we normally take now a coral that in the past, let's say the size of a golf ball, and instead of waiting 2 or 3 years till it got towards the size of a tennis ball and cut it into 2 pieces, we now take that same one and we cut it into 20 to 100 tiny fragments. And so we make hundreds at a time, and each of those hundreds are stimulated to grow up to that same size again in months instead of years. And so we can outplant tens of thousands of corals back onto the reef.
Though Dr. Vaughn's program to restore corals has shown measurable success,
There are still steps we need to take to prevent this from happening in the future.
If we do not learn from our past mistakes, we are destined to repeat them in the future.
Dr. Vaughn's personal goal is to plant 1 million corals before he retires and hopes he can entice 100 more people to also adopt this goal in 100 other countries in the hopes that 1 billion corals will be planted.
Not all of us are able to go out and actually plant coral like Dr. Vaughn. There's still things that each of us can do every day to help to protect against the primary cause of reefs dying, which is climate change.
Things such as turning off light switches when you leave a room, taking showers, which are just 1 minute shorter, and recycling at every opportunity are key and simple changes we can make.